Hello, brothers. I trust you've had a blessed week. This week I was unable to have our Zoom class live, so I wanted to record it. Some things came up that I needed to take care of, but wanted to make sure to try to get us back caught up on our assignment reviews. And so today we're going to finish our review of the assignment we began looking at last week, assignment 2.14. If you'll remember, this was the assignment that had several steps, basically from the block diagram to the exegetical idea, or to the consulting resources. Sorry. So the first step we looked at last time we looked at diagramming, did a review of that. As you remember, for diagramming, in the narrative, we don't really need to diagram the entire narrative, just a few of the key parts of that narrative, really any instructive portion of the narrative or any key dialogue or extended dialogue in the narrative. So we looked last week at how to do that and then followed that up with the textual observations of the passage. And again, the diagram, if you'll recall, as I mentioned to you last week, the diagram will only be for particular verses within it. You don't have to do your entire chapter, but just the verses that I indicated. So again, if you're studying Ruth chapter 3, if that was your assigned passage, and you're going to be diagramming verses 10 to 13. And then the textual observations would just be done for those particular verses that you diagrammed, as I note here. Make textual observations only from the diagram verses. All right, and so we covered the details of those last week and how to do that, the review of the diagramming textual observations. For this session, I want to focus our attention on the last two parts of this assignment 2.14, and that is on word studies and on consulting resources. Word studies and resources. All right. And so for that, we'll just review briefly resources and what, or excuse me, review briefly both of those, both the word studies and the resources, beginning with the word studies. That is the next step. After we diagram the passage, diagram the key statements in the story, and then make textual observations of those key statements. Then we want to do significant words. So here is where you will look at individual words. And in this case, you're going to want to look at individual words from the whole story. All right, not just the verses you diagram, but anywhere in the story, there's going to be several words, I'm sure, that will require or benefit from word study. And let me just remind you of those steps to do the word studies. If you'll remember, too, by the way, before we start, that word studies are a helpful and important part of the exegetical process in trying to find out the author's intended meaning. But at the same time, we have to be careful that word study is not the complete focus of our exegetical process. In fact, I think really the most important thing is to understand the context of the passage. So that's why we look at the background context. That's why we look at the contextual flow, the author's flow of thought. And then we look at the paragraph itself that we're studying and do the diagram, the textual observations. Those are going to yield, I think, a lot more understanding of the text. And the word studies are simply really will supplement or help clarify certain things. What kinds of words do we want to look for? And again, you're going to want to look for words from the entire story, not just the verses that you diagram. But we're going to want to look for, the first step is identify the significant words. What words do we want to study? What words seem important? What words would help us to better understand the passage? Those are the words that we're going to want to consider, the words that we're going to want to study and understand. So if you remember, we covered these details in your notes on during the module 1. I don't remember if we did much for module 2 on this by way of review, but let me just remind you, in doing word studies, remember the most important way to find the meaning of a word is to understand the context. because words are used within a context. And if you remember words, and this is true for any language, most words in that language will carry different meanings. Most words will have more than one meaning. In fact, today in church, we were looking at James chapter 5 when it says, is anyone among you sick? Well, that English word for sick can mean several different things. Sick can mean an illness, a physical illness. Sick can mean a mental illness. Like we use the term sometimes he's sick in the head, that there's something wrong with mentally. Sick is a colloquial phrase used by younger people when they say, oh, that was sick. What they meant is that was really neat, really awesome, really cool. But they'll say sick, or sometimes we use a word, it's spelled a little differently, but sick'em. To sick something means to go after. Sick, someone can be lovesick. Again, that's not a physical mental illness. That's really an emotional burden. Someone is really loves something, someone else, and so they're just feeling bad because they miss that person. So there's many uses, even of the word sick, even in the Greek words. There can be many ideas for that word. So the best way to come to understand the meaning of a particular word is to understand the context in which that word is used. That will help us tremendously in finding the meaning of the word. So how do we identify those significant words that we want to study and try to understand? Because studying particular words can be helpful. It can give us a background of how that word formed, and it can really give us maybe some more insights into how the word is being used in that context. Understanding the meaning of a particular word can also help us in illustrating perhaps a point in the passage. But to identify significant words, there's a few principles that we discussed in Module 1, and that is look for any repeated words by either the narrator or the character. Usually a repeated word is indication by the author it's an important word. For example, in John chapter 4, the word sent is a word that's repeated several times, and it really connects to the focus of the passage. But look for those words that are repeated. Look for words that seem to be connected to the theme of the story. So if you're studying a particular story, you're going to want to understand, sometimes there's a word that's used quite often. If you look at the book of Judges, for example, the book as a whole, you see that everyone did what was right in their own eyes. So maybe understanding, in their own eyes, what does those words, that phrase mean, be helpful. Look for words that are translated differently. As you're looking at different translations, you may notice a particular word carries it's translated differently in each of the English translations, for example. That might be a word to look at then, because that tells us that perhaps the translators aren't quite sure what it means. So it would be helpful to look up what that word means. Now, if there's a word that's translated exactly the same across 6 or 7 translations, then that's probably the best way to understand that word. So it may not be a word you want to do a word study on. Look for words that have theological significance. There are key words, if you're in a passage as justification, redemption, reconciliation, sovereign. These would be words that you would want to give careful study of, because they'll have more significant, words like compassion, mercy. These things would be words you want to look at to get a better understanding. Look for words that are confusing. You may just be going across and reading a passage, I don't even know what that word means, or I'm not sure. Now, if you're looking at English translation, you could look up the English meaning of the word. That will be fine. But remember, the word comes from the original language, either Hebrew or Greek, or perhaps Aramaic. And so you're going to want to understand the word in its original language, but the translation may not make sense. So you could look at those words. Also, any words that your hearers may not understand. So you're going to need to look at this pastorally as a shepherd. What words in this passage may be confusing to my congregation, to those who are going to listen to me. So these would be some important words to look for. All right, just to give you an idea. You can study, honestly, you could study any word you want. You could study every word of the passage if you want. You'd never get it done, but there's no rules of what you can or cannot do a word study on. Look at these as guidelines to direct us towards what could be the more significant words in the passage. That's why we use the study of the significant words. So what words seem to be important? What words would be worth our time to investigate? All right, so the first step is to identify the significant words. Then, once you've done that, find the lexical definitions for the word in its original language. Now, by lexical just means dictionary, fancy word for dictionary, really. A lexicon, something, another name for a dictionary. And so you would want to look up what are the dictionary definitions for that word, and again, in its original language. And so one helpful resource is Bible Hub. Another is Blue Letter Bible. These are two good online resources to do word studies. There's a Discovery Bible app, which can also be helpful. It's an app that you can get. But you just want to look online. These are two very good locations. I think there are other ones out there, but these are two that I've used that I found to be helpful. So you want to look those up, find the definition given there, or definitions, because every word will have at least one definition, probably more. And then how is the word translated? And I picked out for you, I think, 5 English translations that are good. These are good translations. These are one to look for. You can add more to that, but look it up in at least these 5 English translations to see how the word is translated. And again, you may find that it's translated exactly the same in all these translations. That may indicate whether or not you would want to continue in doing the word study if it's translated the exact same way. But in any case, look and compare, see how it's translated. Then, now here's a key step. Identify how the word is used in other passages, okay? And I put here, look up at least 10 passages and how that particular word is used, all right? And so with that, remember here, this is the key, the circles of meaning. So, okay, you've got a particular word that you want to study. And let's say you go to you'll find on like Bible Hub, for example, it'll have all the cross references there. And I'll show you this when we go to the example. So you may have, pick a particular word and you go to Bible Hub and you see, oh, it's used 87 times. So do I need to look up all 87 usages? You can, but that's going to take you a lot of time. What you want to do is look up really, 10 or 12 usages, but then how do you pick which ones? Well, I think we call this the look up, consider the circles of meaning. And what we mean by that is, if you're looking up a particular word, first look for those passages in the same book that you're studying where the word is used. It'll likely be used in a similar way. Then, if you still, let's say you find 5 of those in the book you're studying, then you want to look up that word, if that word is used by the same author in other books. All right. And then the next layer would be look up if there are other authors in the same genre. So let's say you're studying, for example, you're looking up, doing a word study from John chapter 1, which is what we're going to be doing here in a moment for an example. So you might find a particular word in John 1 that you want to study, and then to look up the other verses, you're going to look up, is that word used anywhere else in the book of John? So first check that. Then, is that word used anywhere else in John's other books? So that would be 1st, 2nd, or 3rd John, or the book of Revelation. Did John use that word in those books? Then you're going to want to look up, how is the word used in other books of the same genre? So other gospels. Do you find that word used? So by other authors, Matthew, Mark, or Luke. And then you'll want to look up, how is that word used in the rest of the New Testament? And then can look up how the Old Testament, the Greek translation of the Old Testament, would be using it. So these are the different circles. So if you have, like I said, you find a word and it's used 87 times in the Bible, just look up the first 10 or 12 uses and just start with what is it used any other way in the book you're studying? Then is it used in other books by the same author? Then do you find this word in books by maybe different authors, but the same genre? So if you're in an epistle, is it used in other epistles? If you're studying Old Testament narrative, is it used in Old Testament narrative, other Old Testament narratives? If you're studying the Gospels, is it used elsewhere in the Gospels? So, and then you'll look at the rest of, if it's a Greek word, the rest of the New Testament. If it's a Hebrew word, the rest of the Old Testament. But again, only go up to 10 or 12 uses. I think in the assignment, I had only indicated, let me see. The assignment, I think I just said, yeah, look up at least 10 passages. Okay? So we'll see. I'll show you an example of this in a moment. All right. And then consult word study resources. So, of course, Bible Hub and Blue Letter Bible, we've already seen. There'll probably be a lexicon there you can look up. But then if you're looking up a Greek word, you can go to Vine's Dictionary of New Testament Words. That's a very helpful resource. Or also BibleStudyTools.com. You can find other lexicons or other word study helps that can give you some other definitions or insights in the particular word. And so these would be step 5 is to do that. And then the 6th step is to take all the information. By the way, the 4th step, you're going to identify how the word is used in other passages. So the key there is how. Don't just quote the passages, but how is that word, the word you're looking at, used in that passage? And then the 5th step, look for other resources. Then the last step is summarize the meaning of the word in the context of the passage and summarize it in a sentence in your own words. All right. Again, remember, context here is key. All right. How is the word being used in your passage that you're studying in the context? Because again, remember, a lexicon just tells us the way a word is used. It'll give us the 3 or 4 or 6 different ways a word is used in a particular language. But it doesn't tell us how that word's being used in your passage. All right. It may give, you may look up a word and it'll have 5 definitions, 5 ways that the word is used, like the word sick. It can be a physical illness. It can be a mental illness. It could be a colloquial statement meaning awesome or great. So you could have all these definitions listed. And that's all lexicon tells you is the way that a word could be used. These are the possibilities. But then the context will tell you how that word is being used in the context. And you'll know from the context, oh, physical illness makes the most sense here. All right. So in this part, in this part 6, and this is the most important one, is summarize the meaning of the word in the context of the passage in your own words. All right. Don't forget this step. This is the whole point of the exercise. What does this word mean here? I don't know how many assignments I've graded over the years where guys will do all the other steps and then they don't summarize the meaning of the word. So it's like, well, that wasn't helpful. You did all this work, but you didn't come up with or determine what does the word mean here. And that's what you want to get to. So just in a few sentences, I think I said one sentence, but in a few sentences, summarize the meaning of the word in its context. All right. Okay. So hopefully that makes sense to you. All right. Now, normally I'm used to asking, are there any questions? But you won't be able to ask me. But if you do have questions, of course, you can message me as well. So let's do an example. Word study using John 1. John 1 has been sort of the example I've been using in these assignment review sessions. All right, so let's look at John 1. It's that passage from chapter 1, verses 19 to 51, where the 4 days where John the Baptist, it begins with him. It's the first story in the Gospel of John, and people are sent by the Pharisees to determine who John the Baptist is, and he tells them, I'm not the Messiah. I'm not even fit to tie his sandals. But then the next day, Jesus comes and he says, behold, the Lamb of God. identifies him as the Son of God. And then the third day, Jesus comes again, but now two of the disciples gather and they approach Jesus. They declare who he is. So there's this unfolding of the identity of Christ. That's the first story that John describes. And so in looking at that story, these were several words that I'm not going to read through the story now, but these are the several words that I determined might be significant words to study. Testimony, used a lot, actually. Testified. It's a very common word in this story. It's used several times. And I picked it not only because it's repeated, but also it's connected to the main point of the story. This idea of these different individuals testifying about who Jesus is. So that was one word that I chose. Found, that was a word that was repeated. Another word repeated, come. Lamb of God, that's a theologically important word. Yeah, it was repeated a couple of times, but, or Messiah, Son of Man, Lamb of God. Oops, I have that twice. But those are words that were repeated, but more importantly, they're theologically significant. Remember I said look for words of that type as well. Now for your assignment, you're going to want to pick 3 words to do for the assignment. I'm just going to pick 1 word for this example, but you need to remember to do 3 for this particular assignment. So I'm going to pick the word testimony or testify just because it's repeated and it's connected to the main point of the story. All right, and so first step, identify significant words. We did that. Second step, find the lexical definitions for the word in its original language. All right, and so remember what I said. There's a couple of helpful online tools that you can use for this that I would recommend. Let's go to Bible Hub. That's one of the tools. Let me increase the. Okay, so how do we use this? Hopefully you guys have used it before for Module 1. Let me just remind you. So we go to BibleHub.com, go to Interlin. Hopefully you can see it right here in the middle of the screen. Interlin. Let me circle it. It's right here. All right. Interlinear. Interlin stands for interlinear, and it will take you to the interlinear. So we go there. Now we want to pick the passage. So we're studying John 1, Gospel of John, chapter 1. All right, and I'm going to notice here, click for chapter right here. All right, right now it only shows one verse, verse 1 here. So I want to click for the chapter. So, right, so if you notice it's right there, I'm going to click that. And then, sorry, let me eliminate. Where is that? There we go. Okay. So we're going to go to verse, I think 19 was the word testimony was used. So we'll just scroll down to verse 19. Here we go. Okay. Now, notice, that's verse 17, sorry, 19. Here we're going to look for it. Notice the red, these are the literal definitions of the word. And here we find testimony. All right. So that's the English word that translation used. And above it, the black is the actual Greek text. All right. Martyria, excuse me. And then above that is just the transliteration of the word. So that's just the word written with English letters, technically Latin letters, but and how you pronounce in English would be martyria. All right. And then the number here, and this is the key, the number given at the top here, that is the Strong's number. If you remember from Module 1, when we talked about this, the Strong's number, William Strong, he came up with a concordance where he identified every single word used in the Bible. In the English translation, he began with the King James Version, and he noted every time each English word was used in the King James translation. So an amazing work. He did this without computers. It was all by hand. And he numbered each unique or specific Hebrew word and Greek word. And so this number here, this 3141, is the Strong's number for martyria. All right. And so he identified that. So Strong's number became sort of a standard that is used. So if we click that Strong's number here, notice here we get the word martyria. All right. And a lot of helpful information is given here. We have in this part, we have some of the basic definitions. Notice testimony, and then how the word is used sometimes. And then we have also the concordance. How is the word translated in the New American Standard? Notice this is a New American Standard exhaustive concordance. Well, interestingly, it's translated pretty much just as testimony. One time it's translated as reputation, one time as witness. But primarily, the New American Standard translated it as testimony. Okay? And so that gives you also how many times it's used, 32 times. 30 of them is translated testimony. Then notice we have, here, remember I told you lexicon, dictionary. So this is a well-known older lexicon, Thayer's Greek lexicon, and it has various definitions. A testifying, what one testifies, or testimony. And that's it. Interestingly, this is one of those rare times where there's really not a variety of definitions, but looks like just only a couple there, and both of those are connected. And then on the right, if you'll notice, these are all the passages where the word is found. All right. Remember, there's 32 occurrences. So we're not going to look up all 32 in that step. But notice here, we're given Mark 14, 55, 14, 56, 59. So here it's used, and notice there's some uses in John 1, 7. And then 119, there's our verse, 311, 332. All right. So those are on the side. You can get those. Now, let's say if you want to get all the verses, notice, come down to the bottom. There's 37 occurrences. You can just press, if you can see it here, right? 37 occurrences. Again, here's the Strong's number, 3141. It has 37 occurrences. So what I'm going to do is hit that, 37 occurrences. These are all the uses of all the different verses you can find it in. Okay? Basically, it's a concordance. Notice, by the way, just a quick glancing, Revelation, that's John's book, right? 3rd John, John's book. 1st John, John wrote that as well. All right, so we have several references by John in the other books. And then there's several in the Gospel of John. Let's see how many outside of it. Titus, Timothy, Acts. So 1, 2, 3. And then these are all references in John. And then 4, 5, 6, 7. Interesting. I actually hadn't noticed this before. Of the 37 uses of this word, 30 of them are by John. That's interesting. Thirty of them are used, meaning in either John's Gospel, or in 1st, 2nd, or 3rd John, or in Revelation. So this is a particular favorite word of John, and used by him 30 out of 37 times. The other 7 times used by other authors in the New Testament. Well, that's something to an observation to keep in mind. This is one of, and we see this from different authors. They'll have sort of their favorite words, or words used quite often. Grace is a word commonly used by Paul, actually. He uses it more often than the other New Testament authors. And so this is something, and this is shouldn't be surprising, right? We have our own words that we tend to use more often than others. So each person sort of has their sort of favorite word list, if you will. Okay, so going back to our review then of this. So what we're going to do is, which step are we at here? Final lexical definitions. Okay, so going back to Bible Hub here, if we go back to our lexical definitions, we can go to, and here we have the Strong's lexicon. So let me just show you then from what I got from Bible Hub is testimony. So the Strong's, this was what Strong's had. And then witness, evidence, testimony. And then from Thayer's, this is what those two definitions that we saw there. And if you want to go over to Blue Letter Bible, I guess we could do that. Blue Letter Bible, do the same thing. Just let me look up John 1:19 to get our word testimony. Okay. And we're studying the ESV translation. So testimony here, notice you're going to want to hit, if you're in Blue Letter Bible, you need to hit that word tools. See it over here on the left? Tools. All right, so you type in your verse here and your translation. Then once that pulls up, so I had John 1:19. Once that comes up, then I'm going to hit tools here. All right, and that will take me to where I need to be if I want to do a word study. So let me hit tools. All right, interlinear. All right, there's other things you can use here, but we want interlinear because we want to find testimony. There it is. And notice Strong's number. All right, here's the Greek word. Here's the English pronunciation of the Greek word. If you want to actually hear what it sounds like, some people are into that, you can press this over here. Okay, where it pronounces the word for you. But that's not important really for what we're doing here. All right, so just press the Strong's number, just like you do in Bible Hub. And here's the Blue Letter Bible, all the information used here. Now, there's a couple of important help. Notice here, Vine's Dictionary. This will come up later, so I want you to keep that in mind. We'll press this link in a future step. All right. But here it talks about the translation, King James translation, the definitions from Blue Letter Bible, and it's same exact thing we saw in Strong's. All right, here's the Strong's definition, report, testimony. Sorry, I meant to say this is the same thing, the dictionary we saw in Bible Hub, same definitions. We have the Strong's definition here. Then this case, it's Thayer's again. So it's the same lexicon that Bible Hub has. Sometimes it'll be a different lexicon. But then notice what I mentioned. And then, oh, sorry, by the way, yeah, if you want the other verses that it's used in, I believe those are up, yeah, to the right. So notice over here on the right side is where they have all the references. So here it's a little bit nicer in Blue Letter Bible that you can. Now, if you want to look up the usages in John, they're all just collected here, or the usages in another book from the author John. Okay, so in that case, if that's what I want to do, say, okay, I want to look up the other usages in the Gospel of John, I can just click John there, and it gives me all the other usages in John. Okay. All right, or then I can go back, say, okay, how about 1 John? I'll click 1 John on the upper right. Here's all the uses in 1 John. So Bible Hub has a little better organization of those cross-references. Okay? All right, so let's go back to our thing. So just write down here the basic definitions from these. You can use one or the other. You don't have to do both. You can if you'd like. All right, and now the third step is, so the first to identify the significant words. Okay, so we're going to do testimony, find the lexical definitions for the word, and we use the Bible Hub for that. Now, how is the word translated in the following English translations? Okay, so these translations, so I looked up on those translations, how's the word used, and basically the same way. In these 6 translations, it's translated, these 5 translations, it's translated as testimony. Now I added in the Net Bible and the ASV just uh, for some more resources. The Net Bible also translated testimony. ASV had witness. Okay. But basically, all the modern English translations use the exact same word, testimony. All right. Now, step 4, how is the word used in at least 10 other passages? All right. And so this is where we're going to want to go back to first. Remember, the word is used, I think, 37 times, right? Yeah, 37 times. So we don't have to look up all 37 passages. So what I had suggested for you to do is, okay, let's first look up how it's used in John. Okay, and so we can go to Bible Hub here, go up to John, and notice 14 times. See that number 14 there? That means it's used 14 times in John. Okay, so let's hit that link. All right, these are all the uses in John. So what I did is I chose a few from John to put down. You can see that on my notes here. I chose some from John 1, John 3, John 5, John 8. But then I decided, let me see how else it's used. So I looked up some other usages by John in other books, and I just chose one from 1 John 5. Again, you can go back to Blue Letter Bible and go to first usages in 1 John. All right, so here's the usages in 1 John. Okay, or 3 John, there's 1 use, or Revelation, there's 9 uses. So these are the other books written by John, if you want to look. So I went ahead and did that just to be thorough, and found a few other uses and then I looked up one reference outside of John's books in Mark. Okay, again, always translated testimony. So it's used the same way. There's the noun version, testimony, and then the verb version, testify or testifies. Testify, testifying. All right. So these are the verb form, and testimony is the noun form. Now, if you're not sure what that word means in English, what's the English word testimony? You can use a dictionary just to find out to give you more insight, because all the English translations are translating it as testimony. So if you want to go to like Webster's dictionary, online definitions, you can go to Webster's, probably the best resource here, and just look up testimony. And this will give you what the English word means. That can be helpful. Declaration made by a witness in response to interrogation, firsthand authentication of a fact. Okay, so this might give you some helpful insight into the English word. So all English translation using the same word, testimony. You can then, if you want to identify a little more carefully or more exactly from the English, you can do that. Again, remember, it's the Greek word we're interested in, but since all of them are translating it with the same English word, it might be helpful to understand what that English word is. Okay, but you can get more insight. Just go back to Martyria and just look at the definition here. What one testifies, testimony. Testimony, so it keeps using the same word. So testimony in the sense of firsthand authentication, declaration made by a witness. And in fact, if you recall, as I mentioned a moment ago, one translation used the word witness. The ASV did. Okay, so what one testifies, what one declares, what one witness verifies. All right, so identify how the word is used in at least 10 other passages. So I list the passages, I highlight where the word is used. It's used in the same way. All right, then after that, consult word study resources. Now, there are some helpful online resources. I mentioned to you Vines, where you can go. There's a couple ways to do this. You go back to the Blue Letter Bible. Remember, I told you about, where is it? Here it is, dictionary aids. You see it here? And under that, Vines. Vine's Expository Dictionary. So they've already identified a link to an entry here. So you can just click that link. And we're going to do that. Let's see. Oh, and here it pulls up exactly what Vines has. Witness, evidence, testimony, always rendered witness in the revised version. It's the objective, the testimony or witness given to him as to those who will bear it. So here, and you can even look up witness if you want, but here in the noun, Strong's number, testimony, a bearing witness. Okay, so there's the words, the Vine's dictionary. Now, Vine's dictionary will have most of the Greek words that you're going to look up, and you would just look up either Blue Letter Bible might have it, or you can go directly to, as I indicated on here, you can go directly to studybible.info/vines. Let's do that. And just the English word testimony. My system's running a little slow here. Going very slow. Oops, nuts. All right, let's try this again. Here we go. Okay, so here's the Vine's Expository Dictionary. So here's the full detail from Vines. So oftentimes you can get some helpful insights from that. Okay. So here's some more details now. Step 6. This is the key step. As I said, summarize the meaning of the word in the context of the passage. I could put in a paragraph in your own words. All right. And so here what I did. So in the context of John 1, testimony refers to the declaration or affirmation of John the Baptist as to who Jesus was. It is to tell of what one knows or has seen. And that's the idea of testimony. In this case, it was revealed to John the Baptist by God that the Messiah would be identified by the Holy Spirit then descending upon him. And so John B gives his declaration as to what he knows about Jesus based upon this. So see, notice here, I'm talking about in the context. Testimony is John's declaration of who Jesus was or is. And John was telling of what he knew and what he had seen. And then we see example in the context as John declares what he was told by God regarding who the Messiah would be. Okay? So you're going to do that for 3 words. Here I have the example in this is the assignment again, assignment 2.14. So I put in this example that I just went through. It's there in the example or in the assignment as an example. And then so after textual observations, you'll get to word study. And where I say conduct a word study on at least 3 significant words, follow the procedure described above. And in step 8. So identify those 3 words, and then I give you a page to do that. Okay? So hopefully that makes sense. Just follow the example given, follow the same process. And most of you, if I remember correctly, most of you did a good job with this in module 1. So you'll do the same exact thing here for narratives. Just look for those words that seem significant in the story, and then do the same steps that you did for the word study in the epistles. Okay? Now, once you've done that step, there is another you need to do. Following that, again, remember we have the diagram, step 5, the textual observation, step 6, then study significant words from the story, again, the whole story. And then the 8th step is consult resources. All right. So this is where you begin to bring in the resources for your study. And remember, resources can be commentaries, but also Bible handbooks, encyclopedias, other sermons, articles, online journal articles, theology books, can be any resource outside of the Bible that helps to give understanding of some particular part of your passage. Right? Commentaries are a common resource that are used, but there are also several others. Now, in this step, this is where you're going to go to those resources. Now, let me just remind us briefly here about resources. We want to remember that ultimately, right, the coming to a correct understanding of a passage, we want to remind ourselves of the importance that, first, coming to that understanding is a work of the Spirit. As 1 Corinthians 2 tells us, right, that it is the Spirit who gives us understanding. All right, so it comes through a work of the Spirit, but he does not work through passive pastors or Bible students. All right. Yes, to understand a text of Scripture, the Holy Spirit must give us that insight. All right. He's the one that inspired the text. He's the one that gives understanding of the text. He's the one that powers us to apply it in our lives. But it's not a passive process. And so many, I think, Bible teachers and pastors, elders today have a wrong understanding of this. They would say with great conviction, the Holy Spirit's the only one who can help us to know his word. And I would agree with that statement. But then they use that as a way to be passive in their study. That, well, it's the Holy Spirit who needs to reveal it. So I'm just going to pray and sit here and wait for him to do that. Well, that's not how it works. Again, remember, one of our theme verses for the expository preaching program in this class is 2 Timothy 2:15, where Paul tells Timothy, be diligent to show yourself approved. Be diligent to show yourself as a workman who does not need to be ashamed, handling accurately the word of truth. So this idea that we need to remember, 2 Timothy 2 tells us that Paul was telling Timothy to be diligent in his study of the word so that he would come to an accurate interpretation of that word. And then through that, he would show himself approved to God as a workman who does not need to be ashamed. So that tells us there's an active part of this, that you and I need to be doing the work. The Holy Spirit is the one who gives insight, but he gives insight through diligent labor. All right. So what that means then is that correct understanding is only by the work of the Spirit, and that work, the Spirit does his work through diligent study and prayer, of course, dependence. So both diligence and dependence. Now, one of the things the Spirit does use is the work of others who have studied diligently a particular passage. And so once we have gone through those first 7 steps ourselves, and then we have this 8th step, consult resources is what I call it. Again, bring it to you by way of reminder. Consult resources. Now, we put it at the end here. And by the way, I failed to mention, the Apostle Paul even indicates he used resources. This is Paul himself, right? This is the guy that knew everything, it seems like. He himself used resources. 2 Timothy 4:13, he tells Timothy when Timothy just comes to bring his cloak and the scrolls and the parchments. I believe those were of other writings that Paul had access to, and he used those in his study of the word. So even Paul used outside resources. Now, as I mentioned, notice this step comes at step 8, not step 1 or 2 or 3 even. But after we have done our careful, diligent study, now we're at a place where we're ready to effectively use those resources. After we've done our own exegetical work, now we are in a place where we can use these resources. So it's the same as in studying epistles, right? We do it towards the end of our study, not the beginning of our study. Because at the end of our study, we can then consult these various things to provide additional help for us You know, they serve several roles. One, these outside resources can add more thoughts, more insights, perhaps that we didn't see in our study of the passage. Resources can be a great protection for us because to help us from coming up with a very wrong understanding of the text. If we don't see our interpretation in any of the resources we use, then perhaps it's something that it's an incorrect understanding of the text. These resources can give us further insights, further clarifications. It can provide helpful quotes or illustrations, especially if you are looking at other sermon resources, these kinds of things. So resources are a very, very helpful tool. I have used them all the time, but try to use them later in the process, because if I use it later, I've already wrestled and worked with the passage, and so I can tell when I read the resources, I can more quickly read those resources because I already understand a lot of what's in the passage. And so the resource that just kind of repeats that, I can just skip through that part, and then focus on those things in the resource that are a little different, or things I hadn't thought of, or maybe helpful corrections on what I had come up with. And so really, but if you don't study the passage yourself and then just go directly to the resource, then it's all going to seem new to you. It's going to take a lot more time to read through the resource. I've just found that it's much quicker. I use resources much more effectively and efficiently, less time if I've done my own study first. So I want to encourage you to do that. And remember, when you consult resources, you need to give credit to those resources, especially if you use something from that resource in your sermon. You want to make sure to acknowledge that. Now, in Module 1, I gave you a long list of various resources that are helpful to use. Here's just a shortened list of them. That you can, again, it's in your notes. All right. Various commentaries, some sermon, Martin Lloyd-Jones sermons, Grace to You, John MacArthur's sermons. So those are some places. S. Lewis Johnson's sermons. You can also go to, and put it here, I think, some study Bibles. All right, so different types of online resource. And again, there's a more extensive list given in the Module 1 syllabus. I might have even put it in Module 2, but I think Module 1, go back to that syllabus. Okay. Now, how to use those resources. This is what I typically do is, again, look for any helpful information that gives you further insight, clarification of your passage. Take note of helpful quotes, etc. So what you're going to want to do is, what I do anyway, is I'll take the resource, and then if I'm looking at, say, a passage, I'm in verse 3 of the text, I'll just have a separate document, and I'll have verse 3, and then I'll put under verse 3 any comments or insights from a resource. I'll compile it there. So then at the end, I'll have organized by verse all the input that I got from the various resources. Now, for the assignment, you don't have to do all that. You need to consult the resource, look through it, get from it information that's helpful to you, new insights or confirmation, things like that. All I've asked you to do on the assignment is to note, here, let me do this. All I've asked you to do on the assignment is to just note what resources you used, right? You don't have to, all the other stuff you do on your own. So for example, for John 1, these are some other resources I used for my study of that passage. Some online, various commentators, Tom Constable, Ryle, expositors, some Bible encyclopedia information, some sermons, this case from John MacArthur. So I just list those. So that's what you're going to do in the assignment. All right, is just list all outside resources you use to study your passage. Use the format described in the instructions. So again, I gave you an example of this in the notes here. Consult resources. And then I just put down. So that's all you're going to do for the assignment. Now, for your study of the passage, don't just look at the resource. Say, okay, here's a resource. Actually study, read through the resource. Study it, get the information from it. Anything that you found helpful. Take notes for yourself, and then you can use that to help you better understand the passage. But for the assignment, all I want you to do is just tell me what resources you used. And there are several that you can use online. Those of you who live near the main campus or Living Word in Banawa, there's a really nice library there with several commentaries, other resources that you can access. I would highly recommend you do that. If you live nearby, just go there and use the books there in the library. In fact, when I was there last class, I was studying for 2 Corinthians, and I used some of the books from the library there that proved very helpful. So that's an option if you are able to take advantage of that. There are many online resources as well that can be helpful too. Okay, so that's what entails all of assignment 2.14. All right, again, it's going to be the diagram just of those few verses that I noted for you from your story, from your assigned passage, textual observation of those diagrams, and then word studies on at least 3 words from the whole story, and then consult resources for your story, for your passage. Identify those resources you used in your study. Okay? Hopefully that makes sense. Again, I apologize for not being able to do this with you live, but at least I hope this video has been helpful for you as far as review. Please refer any questions you have to me via Facebook message or WhatsApp, or you can email me as well. Or you can message me through the Canvas, but those, I tend not to see those messages quickly. So the best way is probably Facebook Messenger as far as anything you need from me or questions you have. Okay. So I continue to pray that you're able to press forward, keep working on these assignments, and I look forward to getting them from you and grading them, and then eventually hearing your sermons as you deliver them in December. Again, December 9th, I believe, is our 9th through the 14th. It's going to be our class. So make sure to have those dates set aside and just keep working away. Try not to get too far behind, and I'll continue to pray for your studies. God bless you, brothers.